The wind came first, long before the snow. It moaned across the ridges like a restless ghost, rattling the loose shingles on Nora Jenkins' farmhouse. The old place had stood for nearly a century on the edge of Pine Hollow, a lonely stretch of mountain road that twisted like a snake through the forest. Nora had lived there nearly all her life. She'd buried her husband there, raised her son there, and now, at 82, she kept mostly to herself, with her cat, Mabel, for company. That night, the air had a strange heaviness to it. The radio warned of a sudden blizzard rolling down from the north, but Nora wasn't too worried. She'd seen worse in her lifetime. She brewed her evening chamomile tea, humming along to the crackle of the old wood stove and the ticking of the kitchen clock. Outside, the world was already vanishing into white. Snow fell hard and fast, swirling around the windowpanes in ghostly spirals. By the time she finished her tea, the wind was howling loud enough to drown out the old house's creaks. She wrapped a shawl over her shoulders and peered through the front window, expecting nothing but darkness. That's when she saw the lights. At first, she thought it was lightning, brief flashes on the horizon. But they were steady, growing brighter, closer. Headlights, many of them. A low, thunderous rumble followed, rolling through the valley like a stampede. Nora squinted. Through the curtain of snow, she counted a dozen, no, more, dark shapes moving slowly up the road. Motorcycles. For a moment, she thought she must be imagining things. Who would be riding motorcycles in a storm like this? But the sound grew louder, the growl of engines straining against ice and wind. Then, faintly, a horn. A knock came a minute later. 3 sharp raps against her front door. Mabel hissed from her perch on the wood box, tail puffed like a bottlebrush. Nora set her teacup down, heart hammering. She wasn't afraid exactly, just startled. At her age, you learned that surprises after sundown usually weren't good news. She opened the door a few inches, the cold wind immediately cutting through the house. A man stood there, tall as a barn door and broad as one too. His beard was dusted with snow, his eyes hidden behind fogged-up goggles. On his leather jacket, she could just make out the faded red letters across the chest, Hell's Angels, Redwood Chapter. "Ma'am," he said, his voice rough but polite. "Sorry to bother you. We're caught out in this storm. The highway's iced solid. We were hoping to find a barn or, hell, anywhere to get out of the wind." He pulled off his gloves, revealing calloused hands trembling from the cold. Nora blinked, studying him. Behind him, more figures waited, 15 at least, bundled in leather and denim, their bikes lined along her snow-buried fence. Their headlights cut through the storm like small suns. "Well," she said finally, her voice calm despite the chaos outside. "Don't just stand there freezing. Come in before you turn into popsicles." The man's eyebrows shot up, but he nodded quickly. "You sure, ma'am? We don't mean any trouble. If I thought you did, you'd be staying out there," she said, stepping aside. "Now hurry up before my floors turn into puddles." One by one, the bikers filed in, stamping snow from their boots. The farmhouse seemed to shrink with every man who entered, the air filling with the smell of exhaust, leather, and wet wool. The wood stove hissed and popped, the only sound besides their low murmuring. Nora moved briskly, pulling more chairs from the kitchen and tossing extra quilts over the backs. "Hang your coats by the stove. The kettle's still hot, and I've got soup if you're hungry." "Soup," someone repeated, incredulous. Another man chuckled. "You serious, lady? I'm old, not deaf," Nora said sharply, though a faint smile tugged at her mouth. "You want it or not?" That settled it. Within minutes, she had 15 men squeezed into her cozy little kitchen, steam rising from bowls of chicken noodle soup. Mabel watched suspiciously from the counter as spoons clinked and grateful sighs filled the room. The leader, his name was Ray, she learned, sat nearest the stove, letting the warmth seep back into his hands. He was easily 6.5 feet tall, his leather vest covered in patches and pins. Yet when Nora handed him a steaming mug of tea, he took it with both hands like a schoolboy. "Thank you, ma'am," he said softly. "Didn't expect this kind of welcome." "Well, I didn't expect a motorcycle gang in my driveway either," she replied dryly. "Life's full of surprises." A few of the men laughed, the tension breaking. As the night wore on, the storm worsened. The windows rattled, and the drifts outside grew higher than the porch steps. Nora laid out blankets in the living room, where the men stretched out on the floor and couches. Someone found her late husband's old guitar hanging on the wall, and before long, quiet music filled the house, rough hands strumming, rough voices humming along. Nora sat in her rocking chair, knitting under the warm glow of a lamp, her cat finally curling up in her lap. For the first time in years, the house felt alive again. "Ma'am," said a younger biker named Jesse, pausing mid-song, "if my mama knew I was sitting here eating soup and singing hymns with a grandma, she'd think I'd lost my mind." Nora looked up, eyes twinkling. "Well, if your mama raised you right, she'd tell you to mind your manners and thank the lady feeding you." The room erupted in laughter. Around midnight, the storm finally began to ease, but the bikers were already dozing off, some on the rug, some on makeshift beds of coats and quilts. The wood stove crackled softly. Ray lingered awake, watching the snow settle through the window. "Ma'am," he said quietly, "you didn't have to do this. Folks don't usually open their doors for us. Not even in good weather." Nora looked over at him, her knitting needles clicking. "Well, you don't look much like the devil to me. Just cold, tired men trying to get home." He smiled faintly, the lines around his eyes softening. "Still, you got more guts than most." She waved a hand. "Nonsense. I've lived through 82 winters and 2 husbands. You boys don't scare me." Ray chuckled, shaking his head. "Fair enough." Outside, the last of the wind died down, leaving only silence and the muffled world of snow. Inside, warmth lingered, real warmth, the kind that came from kindness freely given. By morning, the storm would pass, and the road would clear. But that night, in that little farmhouse on the edge of nowhere, something shifted quietly in the hearts of 15 men who'd thought they'd seen everything. They hadn't seen Nora Jenkins yet. Morning came quietly to Pine Hollow. The world outside Nora Jenkins' farmhouse was wrapped in white, a soft, endless blanket of snow that glimmered beneath the pale winter sun. The storm had moved on, leaving only calm and the faint smell of pine drifting through the cold air. Inside, the little house was still full of the echoes of the night before, boots drying by the stove, mugs left on the table, blankets scattered like sleeping memories. Nora stirred awake in her rocker, Mabel curled against her hip. For a moment, she wondered if she had dreamt it all, the motorcycles, the laughter, the 15 men who'd filled her house like a sudden storm of leather and gratitude. But then she heard it, soft snores, the creak of floorboards as someone moved quietly in the kitchen. She smiled. Not a dream. Ray, the leader, was standing by the window, looking out at the snow. His leather vest was slung over a chair, his tattoos peeking from under the rolled sleeves of his shirt. He looked like a man more used to roaring engines and open highways than the quiet peace of a farmhouse morning. "Mornin', ma'am," he said as he noticed her stir. "Didn't mean to wake you." "You didn't," Nora replied, stretching her hands. "Just resting my eyes. You boys sleep all right?" He nodded. "Like babies. Haven't had a night that quiet in years." He hesitated, glancing back at her. "I don't think I ever will forget your kindness. You saved our hides last night." Nora chuckled softly. "I didn't save anyone, dear. The good Lord just told me to open the door when someone knocked. That's all." By the time the others woke, the smell of bacon filled the kitchen. Nora, bustling about in her apron, flipped pancakes while a few of the bikers tried to help, mostly in the way large, clumsy men help in small kitchens. One nearly burned the toast. Another dropped an egg, but the laughter that followed filled the room with warmth that even the stove couldn't match. "Ma'am, I swear," said Moose, the big man who'd played her piano the night before, "if I had a grandma like you, I'd never leave the house." "Well," Nora said with a grin, "it's not too late for breakfast manners, Moose. You chew with your mouth closed, and maybe I'll consider adopting you." They roared with laughter again, the sound bouncing off the walls. When breakfast was done, the men packed up their gear and headed out to check their bikes. The storm had left a foot of snow, but the sun was strong now, melting paths across the road. Nora followed them to the porch, squinting against the bright glare. Ray turned to her. "We'll be heading out, ma'am. Gotta get back to Redwood." "But I meant what I said, we owe you one." "Owe me nothing," Nora replied. "Just promise you'll drive safe. And maybe find a nice motel next time the sky looks mean." He laughed, shook her small hand carefully in his massive one, and then nodded to the others. Engines rumbled to life one by one, echoing through the valley like rolling thunder. Nora watched from the porch, the wind tugging at her shawl, until the last red taillight vanished down the bend. By noon, the house was quiet again. Too quiet. She washed the dishes, humming to herself, but her thoughts wandered to the night before, to the laughter, the music, the strange comfort of strangers who'd felt like old friends. It wasn't often she had company anymore. Her son lived 2 states away, and the winters were long out here. Still, she smiled to herself. They'd made it through the storm, all of them. That was enough. The next morning dawned bright and crisp. The world had settled back into its usual stillness. Nora was out feeding her chickens when she heard it again, that distant, familiar rumble. She frowned. The sound was low but steady, rolling like thunder from far away. Mabel darted under the porch, spooked by the noise. Nora straightened up, hand shading her eyes. Then she saw them. At first, just a few dots down the road. Then more. Dozens. The sound grew louder. Not 15 this time, but far, far more. The sunlight flashed off chrome and metal as the line of motorcycles wound down the road like a steel river. Nora's breath caught. When they finally reached her gate, the engines began cutting out one by one. The silence that followed was almost louder than the roar had been. Nearly 100 motorcycles lined the road in perfect formation, their riders standing beside them, men and women alike, faces windburned, eyes bright. Every one of them wore the same insignia on their jackets, Hell's Angels. Ray was at the front. He took off his helmet and grinned. "Morning, Miss Nora," he said, his voice carrying easily over the snow. "We told the rest of the chapters about you. Figured you deserved a proper thank you." Well, goodness," Nora stammered, laughing in disbelief. "You'll scare the life out of my chickens, that's what you'll do." The bikers laughed. Then several of them stepped forward carrying boxes, groceries, firewood, canned goods, even a brand new snow shovel. One man handed her a thick envelope. "What's this?" she asked. "For your roof," Ray said simply. "We passed by your place again this morning, saw the leak in the back. Figured it needed fixing." "Oh, heavens," Nora whispered, her eyes welling. "You didn't have to." "Yeah, we did," Ray said gently. "You opened your door when no one else would've. That means something in our world." Behind him, the bikers were unloading more bags of feed for her chickens, a new stack of firewood, even a brand new woodstove someone had strapped to a trailer. "You can't be serious," she said, half laughing, half crying. "This is too much." Ray shook his head. "Not enough, ma'am. You gave 15 men a place to stay when they had nowhere to go. You showed 'em what kindness looks like. Now the family's just paying it forward." The family. That word caught her off guard. She looked down the long road lined with bikes, the gleaming chrome reflecting the morning sun like 1,000 stars. These weren't strangers anymore. Not to her. "Well," she said finally, her voice trembling but warm, "I suppose next time you all come by, I'll need to get a bigger kettle." Ray grinned wide. "Don't worry, Miss Nora. We'll bring the coffee, and a few more mouths to feed." The laughter that followed was deep and rolling, echoing down the valley. Engines fired up again, one by one, sending clouds of exhaust into the cold air. Before they left, a few riders lingered to hug her, rough, leather-clad giants wrapping their arms around a frail old lady who'd reminded them that kindness still existed in the world. When the last of the bikes finally roared away, the quiet returned once more to Pine Hollow. But it was a different kind of quiet now, one filled with warmth and wonder. Nora stood on her porch, holding the envelope, tears freezing on her cheeks, and whispered to herself, "My Harold would have loved this." She smiled, looking down the empty road where the tire tracks still glistened in the snow, and for the first time in years, she didn't feel alone. Because somewhere out there on the highway, 100 bikers rode with a story about a kind old lady who opened her door on the coldest night of the year, and changed them forever.